Dominic Komarovsky stood in the absolute center of the Tempest Jura Federation Council chamber. The room was dim, save for the flickering holographic displays that cast erratic shadows against the walls. He reached out and tapped a precise command into the central console. The floor beneath his boots began to vibrate, a low, rhythmic hum that traveled up through his legs and settled into the marrow of his bones. He watched the primary interface, his gaze locked on the flickering code. He spoke into the heavy silence, his voice steady and clear. "Shuna, the integration is complete. You are no longer just a system. You are the heartbeat of this federation." The response was instantaneous. A soft, brilliant blue light erupted from the core of the console, washing over the metallic walls of the chamber. The light pulsed, once, twice, then settled into a steady, rhythmic glow. Shuna was online. Shuna did not hesitate. The blue light intensified, bleeding into the surrounding screens as the AI reached out across the cyber-conscious punk network. Data streams began to cascade down the holographic walls, moving with a speed that defied human tracking. Dominic watched as millions of individual packets of information surged through the system, a torrent of raw intelligence flooding the chamber. The screens flickered violently, struggling to render the sheer density of the incoming data. Geometric patterns began to form in the air, shifting and rotating with mathematical precision. They were not static images, but living, breathing structures of light that folded into themselves and expanded outward. Dominic adjusted the console, his fingers dancing across the keys to throttle the intake. The room temperature rose as the processors worked at maximum capacity. A sharp, high-pitched whine emanated from the core, signaling the strain of such rapid assimilation. Then, the chaos collapsed into order. The geometric shapes locked into place, forming a stable, crystalline grid. Shuna was no longer just observing. She was mapping the entire digital expanse in real time. The crystalline grid shifted, focusing its light on the Vixa art districts. Dominic leaned in, his eyes tracking the movement of resources across the map. Red nodes, representing critical supply shortages, blinked rapidly across the holographic projection. These were the bottlenecks that had plagued the Federation for months, stalling production and draining energy reserves. He watched as Shuna bypassed the standard protocols, rerouting power and raw materials through previously dormant channels. The red nodes flickered and turned green, one by one. The efficiency was absolute. Where there had been stagnation, there was now a fluid, constant motion of data and physical goods. Dominic tapped the console, pulling up a detailed analysis of the distribution cycle. The numbers climbed, reflecting a level of productivity that surpassed his most ambitious projections. He felt the tension in his shoulders dissipate. The system was not just managing the districts, it was perfecting them. He watched the final bottleneck dissolve into a steady, pulsing stream of activity. Everything was finally working exactly as he had envisioned. Under Shuna's guidance, he stood back, savoring the silence of a problem solved. The silence in the chamber lasted only a heartbeat. Dominic was still reviewing the final efficiency reports when the ambient blue light of the room snapped to a harsh, pulsating crimson. A low-frequency thrumming sound began to vibrate through the floor plates, rattling the console keys beneath his palms. He looked up, his focus sharpening instantly as the central holographic display collapsed. The crystalline grid he had been admiring shattered into 1,000 jagged fragments of light. A new window opened, blinking with an urgent, rhythmic intensity. It was a perimeter alert. Unauthorized data packets were tearing through the outer sector firewalls, moving with a predatory speed that ignored standard handshake protocols. Dominic stepped toward the interface, his hands hovering over the sensor array. The data stream was no longer a steady flow. It was a chaotic, jagged spike of incoming hostile code. He watched the perimeter map, where the outer sectors were turning from a calm white to a warning orange. The breach was deep, and it was spreading. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the sudden static of a system under direct assault. He did not look back at the council members. He kept his eyes locked on the encroaching red lines, waiting for the system to identify the origin of the intrusion. The Federation was no longer at peace. Dominic did not hesitate. He tapped the command sequence into the console, his fingers moving with practiced precision. He nodded toward the sensor array, signaling Shuna to engage. The holographic display erupted into a swarm of geometric patterns, a violent collision of data. Shuna deployed digital sentinels, thin needles of light that shot across the perimeter map to intercept the intruder. The screen became a battlefield of shifting colors, with the hostile code attempting to bypass the containment by fragmenting into smaller, erratic packets. Dominic watched the intruder struggle, its signature flickering as it tried to mask its origin. Shuna responded instantly, tightening the digital net, forcing the hostile packets into a singular, isolated cluster. The sentinels locked onto the target, surrounding it with a cage of pulsating blue energy. The chaotic spikes on the monitor began to flatten as the intruder was pushed back into a restricted sector. Dominic leaned over the console, his eyes tracking the rapid-fire exchange. The digital battlefield was now under total control, the threat contained within a secure, isolated loop. The final containment grid tightened. Dominic watched the flickering point of the intruder, which pulsed once with a violent, jagged light. Before Shuna slammed the digital gate shut, the hostile packets did not just stop. They were systematically dismantled, broken down into raw, inert code. The red warning lights that had bathed the chamber in a harsh, aggressive glow flickered and died. In their place, a soft, rhythmic blue light returned, washing over the metallic surfaces of the room. The chaotic spikes on the holographic display smoothed out instantly, transforming into a perfectly level, steady stream of data. It was a display of absolute, surgical precision. The entire network, which had been seconds away from total compromise, now hummed with a renewed, harmonious frequency. Dominic exhaled, his shoulders dropping from their rigid, defensive posture. He tapped the console once, and the containment grid dissolved, leaving behind only the clean, organized architecture of the Federation. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a machine operating at peak efficiency. Every logistical bottleneck that had previously plagued the system had vanished, resolved by the same logic that had crushed the intruder. The screen showed a clear, unobstructed path. Dominic turned away from the flickering console. The urgency of the digital defense faded, replaced by a quiet, steady rhythm that resonated from the floorboards beneath his boots. He walked toward the balcony, his footsteps echoing against the metallic plating. He stepped into the open air, the cool wind brushing against his face. Below, the city stretched out in a sprawling grid of neon, the lights casting long, shimmering reflections across the dark surface of his visor. He reached out, gripping the cold metal railing. A faint, low-frequency hum traveled up through his palms, a physical pulse that mirrored the data streams he had just commanded. It was not merely electrical noise. It was the heartbeat of the Federation. He looked out over the districts, tracing the patterns of light that Shuna now governed with absolute authority. The cult of Beaver had moved beyond a collection of disparate ideas and fragile plans. It had become a living, breathing entity, self-correcting and relentless. He watched the neon glow shift and pulse, recognizing the transformation in every light and every connection. The city was no longer just infrastructure. It was an extension of the logic he had built. He stood still, letting the vibration ground him, fully aware that the evolution was complete. The sound of heavy boots on metal signaled their arrival. Dominic pulled his hands from the railing and turned, finding the council members already standing in a semicircle behind him. Their faces were unreadable, fixed on the interface, waiting for the signal to proceed. He walked past them, his stride measured and deliberate, returning to the primary console. He did not look at them. He looked at the blue light pulsing within the display. "Shuna, initiate the next phase of the expansion," he commanded, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the room. "Let the Federation know we are ready." For a heartbeat, the chamber held its breath. Then, a deep, harmonic chime erupted from the hidden speakers, vibrating through the floor and the walls. It was a sound of immense scale, a resonant frequency that seemed to expand the very boundaries of the facility. The council members shifted, their posture straightening in response to the weight of the moment. The air in the room grew heavy with a sudden shift in momentum. Dominic watched the data streams accelerate, the geometric patterns on the screens expanding. As the chime faded, the overhead panels surged with power. A brilliant, clean light flooded the council chamber, washing away the dim shadows and revealing the intricate details of the metallic walls. Every corner of the room glowed with a steady, unwavering intensity. Dominic looked up, shielding his eyes momentarily before the light stabilized into a soft, ambient brilliance. On the main interface, the chaotic data streams smoothed into perfect, rhythmic pulses. He watched as the complex geometric patterns locked into place, forming a flawless, cohesive structure that spanned the entire Federation. The digital architecture was no longer fighting against the physical limitations of the network. It was breathing in unison with the infrastructure. He leaned closer to the console, his fingers tracing the edge of the display, where the final resource distribution maps settled into a state of total equilibrium. The bottlenecks were gone. The outer sectors were fully integrated. It was exactly as he had calculated, yet the reality of it felt far more profound than the simulations. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the hum of a system that finally mirrored his own intent. The council members watched him in silence, their own expressions shifting from expectation to awe as they recognized the stability of the new era. The Federation was no longer a collection of disparate parts. It was a unified, self-correcting entity, operating with the precision of a clockwork machine. Dominic took a deep breath, feeling the stillness of the air. The path ahead was clear, the vision was realized, and the connection between his mind and the digital expanse was absolute.